Super.
The Mini showed the world what a practical small car could be like, but it was Fiat's 127 Super Mini that took the category by storm in the 1970s. The 127 was a big hit, but it would be its successor, the Fiat Uno, that would go on to be the numero uno selling Fiat. Yet the Uno wasn't originally intended to be a Fiat at all. Just why was the Uno so popular, and why was it still in production 21 years after it was supposedly replaced? This is the Fiat Uno story. The 127 had been a big success for Fiat, and an update in 1977 kept it selling. Work soon began on a third generation to be released in 1981. But over at Fiat's subsidiary Lancia, the management team were working on a replacement for the Autobianchi A112, as they were responsible for the Autobianchi brand. The Fiat 127 popularised the Super Mini category, but the catchily named A112 is regarded by some as the first modern three-door hatchback Super Mini, beating the Fiat 127 by 18 months. But by 1979, the A112 was looking ancient against modern competition such as the Ford Fiesta. Lancia enlisted Giorgetto Giugiaro from Italdesign to come up with something new that could compete with its larger competition. Giugiaro came up with a car that was still very compact, with a surprising amount of space inside. But with changes at the top of Lancia, the project was in limbo. Fiat took a look at what they were doing and decided that they rather liked it, and it would make an ideal replacement for the 127. So despite a third generation 127 being launched in 1981, the new Fiat Uno, not that different in look from Giugiaro's original design, would launch only 2 years later. The Autobianchi A112 would have to soldier on without much of an update until 1985, when it was replaced with the Fiat Panda-based Y10, known in some markets as the Lancia Y10. The prototype was just a 3-door, but Fiat's new car would be launched as both a 3 and a 5-door, as was the 127 before it. And like the previous car, Giugiaro's design focused on as much interior space as possible. This meant a very steep hatchback angle, almost making it a mini estate car like the new Volkswagen Polo, but it was also longer, wider and taller. In fact, when it launched, it was the tallest car in its class. The Fiat 127 had a pedestrian drag factor of 0.45. Giugiaro and Fiat found every way to make the new car better. The cut-off camtail shape helped, as did the bonnet rake, the minimal front air intake, and the removal of as many external adornments as possible, such as the recessed door handles on the 3-door model. It all added up to a drag factor of just 0.34. Inside, the focus was on ergonomics, making a small car roomy for 4 adults, or 2 adults and 3 children. Fiat used mannequins of all different body types and made sure that they could easily get in and out of the car, especially important for the 3-door model. But whether it was a 3 or a 5-door, those doors opened wider to allow easy access. The large rear hatch opened up to a boot that had more carrying space than it had a right to once the rear seats were folded. And those rear seats had a party trick: they could recline a little for additional comfort. The interior style was little changed from Giugiaro's A112 prototype, and the dashboard would have a clean layout that presented just what the driver needed, using the minimum of materials. This minimalism was shown to full effect with the single stalk used for the indicators and the horn. The lights and wiper controls were moved to the instrument cluster. The ashtray on the dashboard had the unusual feature that it could be positioned anywhere along the dashboard. And although there might only be one side mirror, on some models it could be adjusted from the inside. To produce the new Uno, Fiat updated the 127 facilities in Turin with modern robotic machinery that could produce 2,200 cars every day. 200 robots built each car using less metal, thanks to computer design that reduced the number of folds. Additional care was made to prevent rust. Each metal joint was protected before welding and afterwards sealed to avoid contact with the atmosphere. Prototypes were subjected to hundreds of thousands of miles of durability tests, and cars were subjected to tests in salt water and long stays in corrosion chambers. Fiat were keen to tout the steps they'd gone to prevent rust, but they stopped short of offering more than the 12-month warranty. After spending £380 million on development, it was time for the Uno's launch. But with 5.6 million 127s sold, the new car had big shoes to fill. The new Fiat Uno launched in 1983 at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida for some reason, getting its photo taken in the rocket garden. The commercials were also pretty out of this world. Maybe it was just because there was so much space inside? Okay, enough of the space puns. Fiat's creative design department even produced a creative brochure that actually spoke back to you. But marketing aside, it was motor critics and the public that would decide if the Uno would be a success. There was a lot to like. It had good handling, performance, economy and practicality. But the lack of attention to detail on those early cars meant the door seals weren't quite right, leading to road noise at high speeds, despite Fiat adding extra sound deadening to the bulkhead to reduce engine noise. Maybe not a big problem in Italy, but the heater wasn't the best in the world. But it did allow both hot air to go to your legs while fresh air cooled your brow, something that would be handy in cars today. The Uno, one in Italian, might have been named for its single windscreen wiper, but without a cam to get to the corners of the screen, on a wet day it could leave the driver ducking their head to find a clear part of the windscreen to look through. Being the tallest car in its class meant there was good headroom both in the front and the back for tall people, but it made this little car especially susceptible to crosswinds. Oh, and the optional Fiat radio was a bit rubbish. But these were mostly minor problems that could be easily corrected. Fiat had the basics right, and that included the engines. There was the 900cc straight out of the Fiat 127 and a 1.1 and 1.3 litre from the Fiat 128, and was also used in the Fiat X19. The Uno was launched as the 45, 55 and 70, which might seem like random numbers, but they referred to the engine's output in metric horsepower. The fastest, the 70S, could best the old Fiat 127 Sport in a drag race with a 0 to 60 time around 11 seconds. But Fiat was anxious to talk about the frugal Uno 45 ES. Additional aerodynamic changes such as wheel covers and air deflectors in front of the rear wheels reduced the drag to 0.33. Fiat aimed for better fuel economy using clever engine tricks such as starving the engine of fuel when it didn't need to run full rich, for example when it was in traffic, but supplying just enough fuel so the engine didn't stall. It also had a higher compression ratio and higher ratio top gear. This all added up to 51.4 miles per gallon, besting the old Fiat 127 with the same engine size while getting similar acceleration. You were encouraged to drive as frugally as possible with a large econometer and light to suggest when you needed to change gear. This combination of low drag along with a selection of economical and peppy engines gave a full lineup that appealed to most drivers. It offered everything a family needed for a great price. As the saying goes, it did exactly what it said on the tin. It needed to. When the Fiat 127 launched, it didn't have much, if any, competition. But 12 years later, every mass car maker had their own Super Mini. General Motors had just launched the Vauxhall Nova Opel Corsa, and Peugeot would launch the 205 just a month later. But the Uno offered more for the price. It also beat out the Peugeot 205 to become European Car of the Year in 1984. There was some luxury to be had on this little car as well. Options included a sunroof, electric windows, metallic paint and central locking. And with it being the early 1980s, a digital clock was one of those luxurious extras. The only Fiat 127 diesel had been made by Fiat of Brazil, but later in 1983 the Uno diesel appeared using that same Brazilian 1.3 litre engine. But it didn't provide many benefits over the economical petrol Uno 45 ES, delivering worse fuel economy and slower acceleration. By 1984, Fiat of Brazil started production of a car that they called the Uno and looked like an Uno, but was actually built on the Fiat 147 platform, a Brazilian version of the Fiat 127. In some markets, it was known as the Fiat Mille. From this, they would produce a saloon version, the Fiat Duna, in 1985. The range was expanded to an estate in 1987, the Duna Weekend, proving that the upright back of the hatchback Uno definitely didn't classify it as an estate. Both versions would be imported and sold back in Europe. The Duna proved to be very popular in South America, and it was the best-selling car in Argentina in the first half of the 1990s. The Fiat 147 platform was more robust, making it suitable for carrying heavy loads, so the van version of the Uno was based on the Brazilian model as the Fiat Penny, City Van and Fiorino. The top-of-the-range 1984 Fiat Uno SX with its rev counter showed a hint of where Fiat was going for 1985. With the Peugeot 205 GTI and Volkswagen Golf GTI hot hatches selling well and providing a halo of excitement around their models, Fiat produced their own hot hatch Uno, the Turbo IE, launched at the 1985 British Grand Prix. Fitted with a turbocharger, intercooler and fuel injection system, it boosted the 1.3 litre engine's performance from 67 horsepower to 103. That was enough to get it over 120 miles an hour and to 60 in a shade over 8 seconds. The official engine size was 1,299 cc's, but after Italy's highway system allowed higher speeds for cars over 1,300 cc's, Fiat suddenly and conveniently discovered that the capacity was actually 1,301 cc's. The dashboard included a host of information, including a turbo boost dial. It could be swapped out for an optional electronic dashboard. The Uno was selling well. 1 million had been sold by 1985 and around 2,000 cars were produced every single day. To keep it selling, updates were made across the range. The Uno got a passenger door mirror, a 60/40 split rear seat, and the smallest engine was all new. Fiat's new 1 litre fully integrated robotised engine, or FIRE, was of course built by robots. It was lighter, used fewer parts, and produced more power while using less fuel. Not only that, servicing intervals grew, and so cost to maintain it went down. This was all music to prospective customers' ears. It was a clever acronym, but including the word engine meant that, like PIN numbers, it was always going to be erroneously called a fire engine, when we all know that this is a fire engine. The old Fiat 127 903cc engine was still available in the budget model, the Fiat Uno Sting. The Uno 55 became the Uno 60 as the 1.1 litre engine was more powerful. In 1986, a larger 1.7 litre diesel engine appeared with better acceleration, along with a 1.4 litre turbo diesel with a 0 to 60 time of 12.4 seconds. This all helped to keep sales brisk, and by the end of 1986, 2 million cars had been sold. The Uno had always had the choice of a 4 or 5-speed manual, but Fiat introduced their version of the Volvo DAF constant velocity gearbox in 1987 as the Uno Selector. Despite being an automatic gearbox, it got similar acceleration and fuel economy as the 5-speed manual and was produced in cooperation with Ford, who used it in their Fiesta. By the time of the second generation Uno in 1989, Fiat had sold close to 4 million. Maybe second generation was a bit of a stretch though, as the exterior was only lightly modified. The front got a new, more streamlined look with a lower bonnet line like the newly launched Fiat Tipo, and the tailgate and rear bumper had a light update. The old car had a drag factor of 0.34, and these changes got the new car to just 0.3. Inside, there was a larger update. There was a new dashboard with a center console, and the heater could be temperature controlled. The driver's seat got adjustable lumbar support. This was a sorely needed update to keep the Uno competitive. Fiat's brochures were sure to point out the benefits of the Uno, but I think they were running out of ideas a bit when they highlighted the car's choke as a feature when many other cars in the class had moved to an automatic choke. The old 1.1 litre was replaced by a larger version of the Fire, or should that be a Fur engine? And the 1.3 litre used the updated 1.4 litre from the Fiat Tipo. This meant that the hot hatch turbo's power increased to 117 horsepower. But the budget Fiat Uno Sting was still available with the old 903cc engine that could trace its roots back to the Fiat 600 in 1955. It would still be used in the Fiat Seicento in 1998. And just to confuse things, alongside the 1.1 litre Fire, Fiat sold the older 1.1 litre engine imported from Brazil and was used on the Selector CVT automatic. The dealers certainly had their work cut out explaining all of this to prospective customers. Despite an Uno update, the 1985 Brazilian Duna Saloon and Estate was still for sale. But selling an old Uno alongside the new Uno didn't look good in Fiat showrooms. Fiat had purchased Innocenti in 1990 and was turning it into a value brand, cars for people on a budget. So it made sense to sell a lightly facelifted Brazilian Uno Estate as the Innocenti Elba. It would be the last car sold under the Innocenti name, a car brand that was founded in 1947 and bought us the reworked Mini that British Leyland should have produced, the hatchback Innocenti Mini. A main target demographic for the new Uno were young people, so Fiat's marketers thought they'd tap into what the kids were into.
Uno rap è una uno più, sembra fatta per me, sembra fatta per tu.
They created a special Uno Rap Special Edition because that was the latest thing, at least it was 10 years earlier. It had a suitably cringe-inducing advert that I'm sure got all the kids rushing down to their Fiat dealers. But the Uno Rap showed that Fiat was reverting to the old trick of special editions to keep their aging car selling until they could launch its replacement. That came in 1993 as the Fiat Punto, although as Fiat did with all previous cars, the Uno remained on sale as a budget option. It remained in production at the Turin factory until 1995 after selling just over 6 million cars. But even though Fiat had moved on to the Punto in Italy, the rest of the world wasn't done with the Uno, especially in developing markets who wanted inexpensive transportation. With raised suspension, it proved particularly good on rough roads. Tooling was transported to Poland, and the Polish Unos would still be on sale in Italy in 1997 as the value-branded Innocenti Mille Clip. They continued to be sold in Poland until 2002. It was produced in Yugoslavia in 1988 as the Yugo Uno, but sales were slow and the war in the 1990s caused production to be untenable. The second version also started production in Morocco, Turkey, India, Pakistan and the Philippines. The new home for the Uno, though, was Brazil, and in 1989 production expanded to Argentina. Production of the Fiat 127 Uno Hybrid that became the Brazilian Uno continued into the 1990s with their own restyle, sometimes still renamed as the Fiat Mille, and was restyled once more in 2005, still with that fire engine, whatever you want to call it. In South Africa, production was licensed to Nissan, of all people, and produced from 1990 until 1998 when Fiat took over production. It was still on sale in 2007 when it got the Brazilian facelift. Such was the affection for the Uno in Brazil, Fiat of Brazil decided to bring it back one more time as the 2010 Fiat Novo Uno, or the new Uno, or the new one if you want to get pedantic. The Uno would get a new platform for the first time since 1983, the Fiat Chrysler Economy platform based on the platform used by the Fiat 500 and Panda. It was a sister car to the world cars, the Fiat Palio and Grand Siena. It was around the same length, but wider and taller than the original Uno. The design of the body came from the concept of the round square, a popular style at the time adopted by cars such as the Kia Soul and Scion XB, and it adopted a similar style to the 2011 Fiat Panda. It still used the same 1 litre and 1.4 litre Fire, whatever you want to call it, as the previous car. Inside it was all you would expect from a modern Super Mini. Like the original Uno, it was basic transport, but it got the job done. Fiat pitched the Novo Uno to a young audience. The old Uno was surprisingly still sold and marketed to customers who were watching their pennies. Fiat showed off the Cabrio version, but other than a van version, the Novo Uno was only sold as a 3 or 5 door hatchback with a raised suspension option for rural customers. It got a facelift in 2014, which included automatic start-stop. Another update appeared in 2016 with an upgrade to the new Firefly engine that got slightly better acceleration. In 2021, it reverted to the Fire just before production ended. There have always been rumours that Fiat would bring the Uno name back, but Fiat already has 2 successful Super Mini brands and doesn't need another. But some have said it could maybe become a crossover in the future, so who knows. The original Uno got a send-off with the Grazie Mille Special Edition in 2013. It should have been the Grazie 9 Milioni, as by the end of production in 2014, the Uno had sold almost 9 million, easily outshining its dad, the Fiat 127. It had been on sale for 31 years, 30 of them in Brazil. Fiat has had its missteps, as many car companies have, but one thing that they've been remarkably consistent with is producing amazing small cars. From the 1950s Fiat 500 and 600 to the 1970s Fiat 126 and 127 to the Panda and the modern 500. But the Fiat Uno is the best-selling Fiat of all time, even if you combine all the 1950s and modern Fiat 500s together. It provided a practical family car for a price that they could afford. As they say, it did exactly what it said on the tin. The Uno provided a lot of space, but so did the Fiat 500 in the 1950s and the Fiat 126 in the 1970s. There are links to videos about both of these cars on the right. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.